Hello and welcome to today's Tech Tuesday webinar, Considerations for as-a-Service, Pay-as-you-go on-premise infrastructure, brought to you by Insight Cloud and Data Center Transformation Division. I'm Amanda Sharp, Marketing Specialist at Insight, and will be your moderator today. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. This webcast is designed to be interactive between you and the presenter. The webcast console you are looking at can be completely customized. You can resize or move any of the windows that you have open. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. All questions from this webcast will be captured. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please visit the webcast help guide by clicking on the question mark icon below the presentation window. The help guide covers common technical issues. I would now like to turn this presentation over to our presenter, Kent Christensen. Kent, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Amanda, and good day, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well, staying safe, staying sane. We're really excited to talk about as a service. This is a topic that would have got zero interest a year ago, and it is exploding. So we have a lot of enthusiasm about this. We'd like to educate you with what we're seeing. So from an agenda, it's fair to say, what is it? Let's define what it is. What's the point of it? What's the value of it? What does it provide? And then I think one of the best ways to understand it, because it is a different way, this is a technical community, and it is a different way to think of the same problem. I'm trying to solve a problem for the customer. I'm going to think of it a little bit differently. And so from that point of view, I would love to invite questions. It's because this is really kind of taking off on discussions in either engagements with clients or engagements with partners, et cetera. And we do get a lot of questions, and you should have some, and so we want to invite those. I think as a group, everybody would learn from those. But in the traditional, as a service, in its summary is, how do I consume infrastructure in a private environment, kind of similar to what I would in the cloud? So how do I pay for what I get? So it's essentially infrastructure in a private environment. And in the past, people would say, what do I need in my private environment? I'm going to go get a bunch of configurations and quotes and stuff, and then that's going to give me something. And this is really a different way to think about that problem. And so we want to kind of go through that. And some of the examples will give you that. Some of the design considerations, these are the things to think about, and then a summary. So if anything, let's talk about making sure that we can make this as interactive as we can, even though you can only do it through the Q&A or the chat window. So first, the market. This is a bunch of data. I'm not going to go through it all, but we're seeing analysts that have started to take notice of this. And one of the most interesting, maybe not even reflected here, is before 2020, i.e. before COVID, Gartner said 15% of all infrastructure on-premise is going to be consumed this way in the next 2 years. Well, it's pretty much doubled that since the new environment came. IDC was at 24% or 40%. By 2024. But the point of the Gartner was that prior to this, less than 1% was. And so they kind of predicted that if nothing changed from 2019, that it was going to go from essentially 0 to 15%. That's a pretty big jump for a new way to consume. And then if you say, like everything else, the new environment has accelerated a lot of trends. This one is no different. It's accelerating. So let's kind of go in and talk about it. One of the things that we like to do is educate people on, I want to procure infrastructure for a business outcome. I want to run this application better. Somebody wants to go to the cloud. We need to do AI. Whatever it is, I got a business outcome. I need an infrastructure of some sort, which is a topic of as a service. Let's call it private infrastructure for now. So the ways I could do it, the way most people are familiar with, is you just buy it. That's called CapEx, right? You say, I need this much. You get a quote. It costs this much. You negotiated it, got your best deal, brilliant engineering into it. You pay for what you bought, right? So you're kind of planning out whether it's 3, 4, 5 years. You determine how usable that is for how long. Certainly you pay up front. But it's likely actually the lowest cost, right? Because you're taking the risk. You're buying it up front. You're taking all the risk. You get a deal. The vendor sends it to you. It's off his books. He took revenue, and hopefully you'll buy more, et cetera. But you need something. There's also a definitive end to it, right? So at some point you got to start over. Now there's an OpEx model that people call OpEx, and can I change CapEx? And quite frankly, up until this year, CapEx was what was actually desired to procure infrastructure. That finance people said, look, if I can do CapEx, I want to do CapEx. Now we're in another environment that, other than kind of the two reasons people would do this most likely is A, I have a lot of uncertainty because I don't know what's going to be in cloud, so there's risk in CapEx. Or I have a lot of uncertainty because of the business model. If I'm a public entity, it might be because I don't know what my budget will be next year. And if I'm a private entity, it might be I'm trying to conserve capital until times get better. For whatever reason, somebody might say, well, an OpEx is a way to save money, cash. That's true. And the most common way of that is a lease, and it's kind of an old thing. But there's a thing called tasking. We don't need to get into this. And one of the points of this is you don't need to over-engineer this. So if I use a term, just blow through it. But there's some rules that says, you know what, as far as financials for a company or a person, if you lease it, it's going to go on your balance sheet. So the analogy I like to use is, I just leased 10 cars. Look at all the cash I saved, and I went for a mortgage, and they said I'm not liquid. Well, surprise. So that's what FASB did. It said, look, just leasing didn't take the asset from being a liability. Therefore, you're using capital, and it just costs a little bit more than buying, right? So CapEx is let's say 100. OpEx might be 102, given the cost of capital. So I'm going to skip over to cloud. And a lot of people look at cloud and say, well, that's a lot easier. Because on the other ones, I have to over-provision. I have to decide what I need for 4 years. That requires a lot of planning. That requires a lot of prediction. And cloud doesn't. I can scale up. I can scale down. I can start. I can stop. I got so much flexibility. And that's true. And so, going to a public cloud and consuming infrastructure from a public cloud has all those benefits. However, it's got challenges. I have to get whatever it is over there. There's some hidden prices, and in some of these cases, especially in storage and things, they can be significantly more expensive. And so cloud has a lot of benefits when I have risk in my business. I have unpredictability in my planning, and cloud is perfect for that. That's where a lot of innovation happens. And then all of a sudden comes an as a service. What if I could consume kind of like cloud in my private infrastructure? So I don't actually have to send it somewhere remote, a public cloud, but could I really consume by what I use? Could I really go up or down, et cetera? And what would that cost? And I'm going to use some generalizations because we're in this market in a big way. Generally speaking, as a service will cost more than a CapEx, but it's not double. It's 20, 30% more maybe to do as a service. But then you take risk out. It says, you know what, I'm not paying up front. I'm paying as I go. At the end of the day, it's kind of like subscribing to cable. If I quit, so nobody's going to sit there and say this is a liability on my mortgage application, et cetera. And, if there's variability in my planning, you're going to actually save money, right? But if I knew exactly what I wanted. But we do believe in many of these, it is not a lease. It's going to be accounted for differently. So this is what's kind of taken off in the market as a service. There's different terms for it, pay for what you use, pay as you go, things like that, the way the analysts are reporting against it. So we talked a little bit about, why would I want this? And so, these are kind of the basic benefits. And if they make sense for your organization, that's awesome. So it's consumption like public, right? And in many ways, a service, I know what it is before I ask, right? So if I wanted to buy a bunch of servers or storage or networking, I would probably have to go and get a quote, and that would go through, some process of coming up with a price. And maybe I negotiated a price, but I don't know what it is before I ask. A true service, like a cloud service, I could probably Google the price calculator and figure out what it costs. And so that's something to look for in a consumption model. Do I know what it costs? Am I paying for what I use? And can I scale up and down? Not everybody does all these, but that's something that you might consider. Are those things that are of value to you? It is a financial tool in a true as a service that says it's not a CapEx purchase. I don't have to plan for the next 4 years. I just have to plan for the immediate future and understand what my abilities are. It likely does not go on my books, although I'm not going to do your accounting or auditing, et cetera. And it's got flexible terms, and so therefore, in many ways, you avoid this FASB lease thing, which is pretty easy. So the two big reasons people are doing this is one whole large set of clients says, you know what, I am not doing CapEx anymore because we've made a major commitment to cloud. Now, in many cases, they don't know exactly how that's going to roll out, right? How that's going to unfold. They might pick a number, 50%, 60%, 80% is going to be in cloud over some period of time. And that's just really a target. And then the reality hits, and the technical people on the call would say, yeah, let's talk to the app owners, let's do this, let's do that. And so at that point, you have to try to figure out, well, what's the right thing to get to cloud? How should I do it, et cetera? So that created uncertainty. What will actually be there? And so that created uncertainty in my private environment that says, well, I can't go to the financing committee and say I want to spend a bunch of CapEx when they say, don't you understand there's this cloud thing underway? So that's a risk. Cloud is a risk. The other side of the risk that we talked about is there's risk in just any of these business models today. We'll talk about some different environments. But one with the federal government says, oh, my God, I got money coming out my ears right now, but I don't know what next year means. And so I think a lot of organizations are saying, I kind of feel like I'm getting a grip on what's happening now in the economy, but I don't know when it'll change and how much it'll change. And therefore, I have business uncertainty. Both of those are kind of addressed with as a service. And so as those become important in the thought process and the decision-making process, this is why this is becoming a very popular discussion. Now, I'm going to break this up into kind of two kinds of services. And I talked a little bit about some of them, and we'll give examples, but some of the storage providers specifically have come out there and said, look, if I want to compete with cloud, I need to be clear on my price. And so, a gigabyte of storage on a public cloud might cost 20 cents, and I'm going to sell you a gigabyte of storage like that with that type of a model in your private data center for 10 cents. So there's what you'll notice there is they never said, and here's the configuration. And let me tell you about the speeds and feeds of the storage device, or let me tell you about how awesome this server is, or let me tell you anything of that, because none of that has anything to do with buying the service. And so that's kind of the big shift from a thought point of view. And most of these, across all of these as a service, the OEM is going to retain title to the asset. So if I use a cloud, there's clearly assets there. You had no input as to what those assets were, what type of storage, what brand of server, how's the network work. It's not part of what you have input into. And that's a little bit of as a service. You might be able to go and ask questions, but the OEM, those providing the infrastructure to deliver the service, actually owns that asset and will design that in order to deliver the service. So it's lower risk, and it's truly a CapEx. There's another whole set that said, in order to tell you the price, I need to design a solution. And so examples here are HPE, Dell. We actually have one that we call private infrastructure as a service. You tell us what you want to build, and then once we understand what that is, we can deliver it as an as-a-service model. And so those are kind of two big differences in there. And just a subset of all the OEMs in this, as I mentioned, a couple of the storage providers got really aggressive early on this is what the as-a-service is for storage. And that might be because it's so easy to figure out how much storage is on the public cloud. So I can Google, tier one Blocker or file services on any of the cloud providers and figure out a price cents per gigabyte. And, you can go and pretty much get I don't know if they're publicly published, but we can certainly tell you that, this is how much it costs for this, this is how much it costs for that, and you can start comparing. And the other ones today, and they may evolve, HPE, Dell, and a lot of times it's like people that have compute. are more like, let's configure it out, let's put together a program, but I'm still going to own the asset and give it to you in a monthly fee, and then therefore it is as a service, and it's not a lease, because I own the asset. You don't have to take ownership of the asset, but at the same time, it's not a predefined pricing. And then we have one called private infrastructure as a service. So that's kind of the broad set of solutions. We have we've made a lot of investment in, and I don't want to advertise, say only Insight can provide this, but since we've been delivering services for so long, it ends up that we have the fortune of all of these people saying, I'd like to put my service on your platform. And so therefore, we can help educate people about this is what they do, this is what they do, this is what they do, et cetera, and help you make decisions. So how do I determine if this fits into my environment? So the first thing is to think about, is it a financial decision you're trying to do, or some sort of a strategy decision? So let's understand the organization's strategy. So some of the questions that are current today. How do I continue or delay, right? So we could all read I pulled the Gartner slide that said, due to the current economic environment, the big infrastructure projects in private infrastructure are going to be down 10%, 20%, whatever that number is. And so a lot of organizations are saying, well, I still have to run the business, and maybe I still want to do some of these transformation initiatives that I had in December. How do I do that? So what do we see? Cloud's accelerating. So now I have more risk from cloud. A lot of internal projects, we can just see across the board, have decelerated. They've been put on hold. They've been saying, hey, we're not going to refresh this year, et cetera. Not all, but a lot. The funding priorities are shifting. So what we're seeing is, hey, maybe I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to do that. And it'd be shocking to see companies that you think can't spend money are spending money in certain areas. But so we're seeing a shift from different types of projects, that these became more important, these became less. But at the end of the day, we saw going into 2020 that overall private infrastructure is kind of aging, and the applications could use some boosts, et cetera. And so there was plenty of opportunity to help with that. So, what's my plan, right? What's my plan now and in the next phase? Am I trying to get through this environment? I know at Insight we're like, I think we've said it publicly. We do believe that when the economy gets better, the market that we are in is going to explode. We believe that technology will remain as important, if not significantly more important. But at the same time, companies might be conserving capital to get there. So let's determine the overall strategy and what's recommended within the organization. How important is the finance side of the organization? Are we trying to conserve capital? But at the same time, we want to grow. Do we want to grow now? Do we want to grow later, et cetera? Are we trying to do innovation? There are things that we want to do innovation so that we can get competitive. Some of that is by demand now. And then what's our cloud strategy? So some of this is just saying, I just need to understand overall the strategy, just as opposed to just saying, well, I'm going to buy something because it's time. So some people get a little confused when we say this is a financial discussion, because based on the last slide, it kind of is. What are we doing and why is important, but you don't need to financially engineer this, right? So if you listen to the business needs, you don't have to have a master's or, in financial engineering to understand that, I want to align to the strategy, the budget, or the consumption. I don't need to do things like, internal cost of capital. People that are doing true financial analysis have all these terms. You don't need to do that. At the end of the day, if somebody in the organization is saying, here's our strategy from a finance point of view, and you say, this is an option, they will figure out, is it a good fit? And I think what you'll see naturally is if you're listening to what they're trying to do, then the opportunity to find out if it's a big fit will become intuitive, right? So leave the financial engineering to them. They'll compute it. I will say this. Some people have had false starts. I think pretty much anybody you talk to right now, if you said, I'm looking for pay-as-I-use pricing. I'm looking for this. Pretty much any vendor will come in and say, yes. Then they'll come in and say, well, either I have an as-a-service offering, and hopefully there's some education here, or I'll make one up on the fly. But I've heard many people in IT say, look, the purchasing and the finance people, et cetera, literally told me, and this is a quote, don't bring me a disguised lease. Don't come up and bring me a disguised lease because I'll, kick it back out, et cetera. And so that's kind of what we're trying to help doing, is saying, let's figure out something that's welcome by that team, aligned to their strategy, budget, and consumption strategy, and build that. So I'm going to give some examples, because I think by thinking of what they were thinking and what they decided to do helps you understand where the good fits are. And I apologize that some of the vendor names are still in here, but somehow they got missed. But anyway, there's a financial organization, and they were significantly aligned to cloud. And one of the technologies they had in there was NetApp existing. And basically what they said is, look, I've got a major commitment to public clouds, being AWS and Google for us, and therefore, I don't know how much is going to be in my data center over the next few years. And so we came in with an as-a-service solution around what was their file environment, which happened to be on NetApp, so that was a keystone solution. And while they were like, you know what, I got to do some stuff that's on premises right now while I make my long-term plan for cloud, this is a good answer. And then in that case, they were able to say, and then when I get to Google, what will I do? And NetApp said, well, you could use our product there too, if you want to, et cetera. But what's awesome is that it became, instead of part of the problem, don't try to sell me a bunch of stuff right now, that's not the mood we're in, to, well, what if I gave you a consumption model that aligns with your strategy around cloud? It was like, absolutely, this is perfect. Matter of fact, what can you do for other areas? So all of a sudden it's like, well, I got a block environment, I got a network environment, I got a backup environment. Let's start broadening that, because this is exactly what we're doing. And so that's an example there. And again, this is an example of somebody saying, I got to figure out a cloud strategy. And there's risk in my cloud strategy, so therefore I took, as a service, was able to take risk out of my cloud strategy as it rolls out. A federal agency. In this case, most federal agencies are flush with money, as you can well imagine, right? And some of them are even getting COVID money injected in, et cetera. So you would think that it's pretty natural that they would be buying everything in sight. But in this case, this agency was looking at this, and he said, you know what, I get this big refresh. But in this case, I don't have enough in this budget unless I do this and this, and I really would like to get to, I'd like to get my transformational objective met, meaning go all flash, et cetera. So what are my options? And so we went in and we said, well, here's an as-a-service option. And by the way, the cost of that on your desired outcome being all flash, et cetera, is well within this budget. Now, they could look at this and say, yeah, but over 3 or 4 years, that would be a little bit more. But at the end of the day, they looked at that and said, but this is perfect. So let's say it was 25% more. Even if it's 25% more, who knows what it's going to be like in year 4 from my budget point of view. And so therefore, it was pretty much an instantaneous, this is the right decision for me to make because of budget uncertainty, because of business uncertainty, et cetera. What's remarkable about this, anybody who's ever dealt with Fed or gone to the DMV, this went into RFQ in 4 weeks. And a few weeks later came out and they purchased it. So they did not wait. They just said, I'm on this bandwagon now. It was kind of funny, is even though they had no intention of using public cloud, they actually said, can I go to the generals and say we're in the cloud? It's like, absolutely. You're consuming cloud. This happens to be your own data center. So another one, this actually happens to be a SaaS organization. Now, SaaS is software as a service. So in other words, they're selling a service, and they're selling a service over the cloud. It's software as a service. And of course, like everything in the cloud, there needs to be infrastructure behind it. And so what we were doing is providing that infrastructure so that as they brought on more and more clients, they would need more and more infrastructure. And so in the past, they had been doing that with CapEx. Here comes 2 more clients. I need X amount of infrastructure. They actually built these pods, et cetera. And all of a sudden, a couple of years into it, they're like, all of a sudden I'm managing pods. That has nothing to do with my service. What my service is doing is saying if I bring in clients, I need to have more infrastructure to deliver the service. And as if I turn down clients, I would turn off some of that infrastructure, which is unrelated to managing CapEx pods that have to be refreshed and maintained. And so they just made the shift. They just said, I am making a shift to as a service. And so there's multiple components in it, but they started off with their storage, and then they said, well, let's look at it all this way. And really what they did was they said, I'm aligning to my demand, to my business model. As customers come in, I turn up the amount of service I need. I don't worry about how many pods it took to deliver that. I don't worry about how many devices of any sort it took to deliver that. That's not my problem. That's the guys behind it delivering the service to me. I just turn it up and down as I need. Perfect alignment to their business model. So hopefully those are 3 decent examples of how people are thinking about this. So I'm going to shift a little bit into how does this change the way the technical community plans? And so one of the things, and I mean use storage because it's one of those things that's required a lot of expertise. In the past, it took a lot of expertise just to make it work right. And then we had to go and figure out that, okay, but this is the effective, and this is the usable, and this is the efficiency rating, and there was all these formulas to figure out what it did. But at the end of the day, we were aligning workloads to the proper tier, right? Should you be on flash? Should you be on spinning disk? Should you be on objects? Should you be, whatever. That's what we were doing. And, one of the things that happened a little bit in the world of storage is in some ways it got simpler in that because flash and spinning disk got closer in price, it was like, well, I'm just going to use spinning disk or flash because it's close enough and I don't have to think about it and I don't take risk that I wouldn't have enough flash. And so therefore it's just easier. So that's what flash kind of did. And by the way, it's a little bit more efficiency. What's ironic is that we come in and we say, okay, this client wants to shift over here. They've got all this today. This is their plan for the future. How much do they need of as a service? And it's like, well, we don't know. It's like, well, how do we get to that point where they don't know what their applications need? So we have to get back to the basics. One of the things about as a service, which aligns to the cloud, is that we're essentially using the effective rate. So if an application needs 100 terabytes, they buy 100 terabytes. That goes counterintuitive to, wait a minute, I got to figure out the usable and then the effective based on the efficiency rating. It's like you got to throw all that out the door. And I've actually literally have engineers going, I don't know what the effective is. We got to go find the effective. Now, we have tools that will do that. But the other thing that happened is we got away from the tier matter. So I think a few years ago, especially in storage, we said, you know what? If I put it on a spinning disk tier versus a flash tier because the cost is so significant, that made a big deal to make sure I get the right things in the right tier. And then it kind of compressed and say, well, if everything's flash, it's high performance, and everything's on low-cost disk or object or whatever, or cloud for other stuff, it made it a little simpler. And now what we've done is we've gone back into a world where actually the tiers matter again. And the reason for that, and what I'm doing is here, and I don't even know if this is readable, but if I look at the concepts of, how do I consume cloud storage, high-performance cloud storage, which is not the cheapest storage. But if I look at it, they would have maybe a standard tier, a premium tier, and an ultra tier. Now, you can Google this, on different, AWS or Google or Azure and say storage calculator, and you can see these concepts of as you go to higher performance tiers and more guaranteed SLAs, the price is not 20% more, 50% more, but it's 3 times more, 4 times more. So the difference between saying, I need a petabyte, just give me all premium, which would be the all flash thing, as to, are you sure you don't want to think about this? Because if it was 60-40, you would save, maybe half your cost. And that is even more pronounced when you start looking at cloud, right? So again, I can't even read just on this thing, but if you say, well, what is object hot? And, if I are very active and what is it hot, and you can see an order of magnitude, then all of a sudden a huge jump to, I'm probably never going to use it. So that you can see multiple orders of magnitude in just understanding the temperature. So what we want to do is two things. One, we want to revert back to effective, because when you consume, whether it's in cloud or as a service, you would consume what you need to be an effective outcome, et cetera. And it does bring back to, hey, you may want to think about understanding what those workloads require and get the right workloads to the right tier, because you can save a lot of money if you do it that way. And again, the flexibility of that as a service says you don't have to be perfect at first. You could put it on all, premium/flash, and then later say, hey, I believe that 40% could be migrated to a lower tier, and because of the flexibility, you can do that. So just some things to consider. So this is an example. This is a real client, but I've hidden the name. We can see here that they got a bunch of what they called clusters across 2 sites. And first thing is they said, well, this is what I got, And so they had this capacity and it added up to some number of, let's say it was 10 petabytes, et cetera. It's like, well, it doesn't matter what you have. It matters what you're using. And so the fact here is they're like, well, I'm using less than half of what I have. Well, that's common because you bought CapEx, and so you didn't want to run out. And so, but all I care about today is what you're using. And then if you want to use more, how do you ramp it up? So let's get to what you're using. And then we said, okay, what you're using here is capacity, but, this type of device had an efficiency ratio, so we got to take that into account. So we said, oh, okay, well, we know that these things have roughly an efficiency number of here. And so it ends up that we came back and we said, aha, so what you need is an effective 4 petabytes. And they said, you know what, this 3 petabytes over here is just some data that I'm going to archive off somewhere else. So price this out such that that's object, but the other one split, based on a ratio between performance and value. And there's where you get the end design. So that was the design. It wasn't going and building a config and trying to figure out how many disk drives, how many ports, and what's the connectivity, et cetera. It was literally going in and saying, let's figure out what you need. Let's figure out the right tier of service, and let's figure out how you want that managed. And we will come out that this was a 4 petabytes, of which almost 3 was object. Another part of it was a value tier, and then 20% of it was on flash, and that was a perfect formula for them. And the benefit of as a service was, if I need to change that in the future, I can. So just a kind of summary, I'm paying for what I use based on what are the tiers, is it IOPS, latency, et cetera. A lot of the as of services will use maybe a baseline or a floor or a commit or something like that. And there might be a discount if you commit to, 100. And then some of them will charge you a little bit more to go over. Some of them won't, per widget, per server, per terabyte, whatever. But there'll be some cost to oversubscribe over the floor. And then, sometimes you can ramp back down, sometimes you go lower, et cetera. But there's basically, I'm paying for what I use at any given time. And in the way of storage, it's, dollars per terabyte. When they say there's there is a minimum, i.e. nobody's going to set this up, probably not the client, nobody wants to set this up if you just want it for a day. But if you're willing to say, I'm going to use this for a year and I use at least 100 terabytes, that's kind of general rule, or 50 or whatever. And then I'll figure it out from there, and I can scale way up and down from that. And so, that's something that we're helping clients do. But those are basically how I consume some of the terms. This is a little bit of, it is our services, but that's not what's important. What's important is to determine how you want it served to you, the client, right? So some people might come out and say, I'm going to deliver you a service, and therefore I'm going to deliver you a different operational experience. Others will say, you need an infrastructure, I'll give you a different way to consume it, and I'll let you scale the services to meet your evolution. So I want to give you an example that's realistic. That a lot of people, what we called was essential services. A lot of these will be offered with what we call essential services, or they might call it critical service. Somebody's got to bill it. Somebody's got to monitor it. Somebody's got to support it. Somebody's got to go install it. Somebody's got to, if you say I'm going to need more, help make sure that happens. So you're essentially just servicing it, right? You're not designing the hardware, et cetera, because that comes from the need. But somebody is servicing it, and whether it's an OEM servicing it or a SaaS servicing it, there's some level of essential services. And then whether they're included by default or there are things you could add in, you can come in and say, well, what I would like you to do is make sure that, you provision it for me, or you do patches for my applications, or you do these other things, or you're proactively watching it for me. So there's other services you can lay on. And what you'll see is some of the OEMs coming in and saying, look at this, the world has changed. You don't even know where your servers are, your storage are, your network works. I've isolated you from that, for better or for worse, and therefore you're consuming a service through my new window. What I am seeing, or what we are seeing, is very few people are saying, change my world, change my universe. What we're seeing right now is they're saying, if you can change the way I can consume, I will then decide how I want the services layered on. But basically, they all come with these essential services. So I'm going to end up with a couple of last things. And one of those is that they don't have to be from one. And so we actually have a rule of thumb here. I think I mentioned that we will create out of anything, right? Chairs and toasters and Pop-Tarts, private infrastructure as a service. It's just one of the things that if the OEM doesn't have a program, then we got to figure out how to deliver that with programs that do. And so the logos on here happen to be companies, OEMs that we have relationships with, plus all the storage companies. And if somebody said, well, this storage company has a really good as a service, but what do I do with the compute? We can combine it, right? This company has, some awesome compute, but they want to use some cloud, we can combine it. And so whether you want to combine that yourself and say, aha, this is my backup guy, this is my compute guy, this is my cloud guy, and this is my storage guy, and I'm going to put that together, or something that we can do is help put that together. You don't have to deal with these one at a time. If your project is to enable a remote workforce with VDI, then you might need some software, some cloud, some storage, some compute, some network. And that's what you need to get the job done. And so you can start to put these together and say, look, what I'm trying to do is enable a remote workforce, and I'd like to consume that as a service. That is one of those things we've seen that, we were a perfect example where, we threw it in the cloud just to get them up and running in 2 days, and then we started bringing it back on site. But ideally, we could certainly see how much it was per user in the cloud, and we could say, wow, we're saving a lot of money by doing this on site, by measuring per user, not by measuring infrastructure devices and trying to do some reverse math. So I will do a conclusion. I don't see any Q&A, so quiet group, maybe you sent some lunch or something. We will invite you to visit our website to get more information. If you had a question for me specifically, you could send an email to kent@insight.com. But just to try to summarize and potentially even give you a few minutes back, we see the as a service was growing going into 2020, and it's accelerating rapidly. And it's coming up in a lot of different environments, and I can't tell you it's one vertical or it's one, federal versus commercial, because it just seems to be coming up across the board. And it's something I think there's no way that we're saying everybody should go and buy as a service. What you should do, whether you're servicing your organization or selling to another organization or whatever, understand this option is there because it does fit and it does help remove risk from and provide flexibility. So if you're in IT and you're struggling with budgets, this is something to consider to say, well, if we did it this way, could we still do this project and not have to have a long-term commitment to the capital, et cetera? So it is something to consider. That generally speaking, somebody either says this is how much it is per server or per terabyte or per, a device, et cetera. We're seeing that in wireless, how much per small site, et cetera. So people are starting to do upfront services-based pricing that you can price upfront, or configured solutions. At the end of the day, it's helping IT organizations align to business objectives, whether that's a cloud objective, whether that's budget consumptions or considerations, whether it's in the SaaS example, let's align to our consumption so that it aligns to our business outcomes, et cetera. You still need to design, but I think the concept of, let me look at the config, let me look at the specifics of the design, you probably could go and see it, but it's not your obligation to create it first. What you're going to do is think about what's needed, and then outcome will come in design. And if you wanted to create your own and compare them, that's fine. But you really are still doing a lot of work that's required, and then trying to figure out, how that fits your strategy, et cetera. And then you can design the service levels and or services to meet your needs. So with that, I do believe we have a question. Where do you see AI playing into these? Awesome question. It's probably on the list, but it's not there yet. So of the partners that are doing this today, it hasn't been presented. So, AI. So AI is part of that digital transformation, and a big part of AI is applications. Some of that AI is infrastructure to run applications. So I could assume that I might need some compute, maybe even some NVIDIA, et cetera. And are those programs baked to support growing and shrinking AI? It's actually an awesome question. Hey, can I spin it up? Can I spin it down? And that part of as a service is not there yet, but I wouldn't doubt if it doesn't come in the next few quarters. So with that, again, we can field questions offline. Again, from an insight point of view, we certainly want to thank you for your time. This is really a timely topic. It's one of the things that is, really heating up in an environment where some things are cooling down, including some IT budgets based on the broad forecast, et cetera. So this is something that's heating up. It's creating conversation. We are here to help. If you want to subscribe or help, obviously we're invested in this. We're passionate about it. And as I kind of mentioned, if you have a question of myself, you can just chat an email to kent@insight.com. We have this information on our website. And with that, this will be recorded so you can share it with your friends. And Amanda, any closing comments?
Thank you for attending today's webcast. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available within 2 to 3 days. You will receive an email notification once the recording is available. Thank you again for participating in today's webcast. Have a great day.